The first thing Laurel saw was not the bobcat. It was the bucket. A gray plastic shape, half swallowed by the snowmelt current of the Rio Chama, rolling and dipping as the river carried it downstream. In that early light, it could have been just another piece of trash. One more thing tossed away when no one was supposed to notice. But someone had noticed. Because between Laurel and that bucket, a pregnant bobcat was in the water. She was already halfway across the river when Laurel slammed her truck into park on the narrow dirt road. Coffee sloshed in the cup holder. The heater fan hummed on without her. Laurel had her binoculars up before she even shut the door. What she saw made her forget to breathe. The bobcat's head was just above the surface, ears slicked back, whiskers streaming. Her body, heavy with kittens, rose and fell in the pale green water as she fought the current. She wasn't drifting with it, she was angling against it, straining upstream, eyes fixed on that spinning gray bucket. Laurel had been a wildlife biologist in northern New Mexico for years. She'd collared elk, released hawks, checked trail cameras that caught bobcats slipping like ghosts between piñon and juniper. She knew these cats preferred rocky ledges and dry arroyos. They tolerated creeks. They did not choose rivers like this one. Not in spring. Not when the snowmelt turned it into a cold, moving wall. Yet here one was, swimming. "For a bucket," Laurel whispered, the words white in the chill air. She climbed down the embankment without thinking, her boots sliding on the loose sandstone. One hand went automatically to the radio clipped at her shoulder, calling in what she was seeing, but her eyes never left the bobcat. From this angle, she could see more. The rounded belly, the way the cat's hind legs churned under the surface, and then faltered, found strength again. Every few strokes, the bucket would disappear in a fold of water, then pop back up farther away, like the river was trying to swallow it and couldn't quite manage. Something about that. On the other side of the river, a cottonwood limb hung low over the water. Instead, Laurel watched her dive her head under, jaws open, searching for the handle. The river roared. Somewhere far above them, a raven called once and went silent. People talk about courage as if it were loud. It always comes with speeches or crowds or flags. But what Laurel was seeing looked like something quieter. A tired, hungry, very pregnant bobcat making a choice no one would ever know about. Unless Laurel kept watching. In a hospital waiting room, it might be a grandmother pacing the same 5 steps between vending machines. In a small apartment, it might be someone sitting up all night beside an old cat's bed, listening for one more breath. That same look, that same refusal to walk away. The current grabbed the bucket, twisting it sideways. The bobcat lunged, disappeared completely. For a heartbeat, there was only the river. Laurel felt her stomach drop. "Come on," she said, to herself or the cat or the river, she wasn't sure. "Don't let this be another one I lose." In that moment, the empty cat bed by the heater vent, she kept stepping around instead of moving. How tired she was of getting there just a little too late. A slick head broke the surface downstream, coughing water, teeth clamped hard on a gray plastic handle. The bobcat had the bucket. Laurel started running. Before we follow her along that rocky bank, before we open that lid and learn what was calling from inside, I want to bring you a little closer to Laurel herself. Why this morning, on this road, this bobcat met a woman who understood what it meant to be swept along and still choose to swim. And if stories like this, quiet, true, a little bit healing, are the kind you want to come back to on long evenings, you're welcome to subscribe and stay with this channel. We'll take our time with you. On most mornings, Laurel did not stop for the river. She drove the same washboard road, same thermos of coffee, same country station low on the radio. The Rio Chama was just a flash of silver out her driver's side window. A familiar neighbor she'd learned not to look at too long, because when you look too long at anything wild, you start thinking about everything you can't control. But on this morning, the morning of the pregnant bobcat and the 2-mile rescue swim, she was already carrying too many things she couldn't control. There was an old ceramic mug in her sink at home with a chip on the rim. It had belonged to her husband. She still rinsed it out every night instead of putting it away, like he might come back in from the yard and reach for it. There was a sun-faded cat bed by the heater vent in the hallway, the one her 17-year-old Tabby used to curl into. The bed was empty now. Laurel kept telling herself she'd drop it off at the shelter one of these days. Somehow, that day never came, and there was a memory she couldn't shake. A winter, years earlier, when she'd been called to help a bobcat snared in illegal wire near a ranch fence. She and the local vet had worked in blowing snow, fingers numb, trying to free that animal before the cold and the damage took it. They'd been 10 minutes too late. She could still see the frost on its whiskers. She hadn't cried over an animal in front of anyone since that day. She saved those tears for when the house was dark, for when nobody could see that the woman who dealt with mountain lions and coyotes and wild horses could still break over one small, still body. So when Laurel pulled her truck to the shoulder that morning and lifted her binoculars, she wasn't coming to the river as a blank slate. She was bringing every loss, every too late, every evening she'd spent talking to the air instead of another living soul. What she saw through the glass, a bobcat fighting that cold current, heavy with unborn kittens, pushing toward a gray bucket, hit right into that place. She knew, in the professional part of her mind, what bobcats usually did. They stayed in the shadows. They avoided people, noise, and strong water. They kept their paws dry when they could. Laurel had trail camera footage to prove it. Grainy night images of spotted fur slipping almost politely around the edges of human life. This, though, this was different. And if you're watching this and thinking of times you've had to wade into something you didn't want, but there was no one else to do it, you're not alone. Laurel didn't use words like that, not out loud, but she felt that same pull. The one that takes you out of your comfortable lane and drops you right into a cold current because someone, somewhere, needs you to move. Later, when she tried to explain to a reporter why she ran that morning, she said, "I just thought, not again. Not this time. Not if I can help it." What she meant was, not another animal lost in front of me. Not another quiet house where grief sits in the corners. Not another night with nothing but regret and the sound of a river you can't change. The bobcat in the Rio Chama gave Laurel something she hadn't had in a long time. A chance to answer an old failure with a new choice. And maybe that's the small lesson tucked into this part of the story before we even open the bucket or count the kittens inside. Sometimes the moment that asks the most of you comes on a perfectly ordinary morning. Same dirt road, same coffee, same tired hands on the steering wheel. The only difference is whether you're willing to pull over and look. In the next part, we're going to walk with Laurel along that riverbank. We'll stay beside her as the bobcat disappears under the water, as the bucket rolls, as seconds stretch longer than they should for any heart. If you feel something in this, if a piece of Laurel's quiet history sounds a little like your own, you're welcome to keep watching, maybe even subscribe, so you can find your way back to stories like this when the evenings feel long. For now, let's go back to the river, to a wild mother who kept swimming, and a woman who refused to look away. 2 miles isn't much on a map. On the Rio Chama in early spring, it's a long way to fight for someone else's life. From the moment that pregnant bobcat pushed off the icy rocks and committed her body to the river, she was stepping into a world she was never designed to love. Bobcats are edge walkers. They prefer dry creek beds, rocky ledges, and quiet draws. They'll cross a shallow stream when they have to, pause, testing each stone. But a deep, fast snowmelt river? That's something they normally respect from the bank. So the question hangs there over the water. What could matter enough to send a wild mother into that current? From the bobcat side, the world was mostly sound and pressure, the roar of runoff, the low thunder of rocks shifting on the bottom, the push of cold against her ribs, against the round curve of her belly. Her whiskers flattened, her ears pinned back, but her nose was still working. The sharp, unnatural scent of plastic, and under it, very faint, the milky, panicked smell of kittens. Every few strokes, the gray bucket jolted in the current, bobbing and spinning, trying to get away. The bobcat angled her body, powerful front legs carving through the water, hind legs kicking in a steady, stubborn rhythm. When she reached for air, she let out a sound no one could hear over the river. When she reached for that bucket, she let go of the bank behind her, for good. Up on the shoreline, Laurel did the same. She ran. The bank was uneven, laced with roots and slick sand. At one point, she slid on loose gravel and caught herself against a juniper trunk, binoculars thumping against her chest. A radio crackled at her shoulder. Frankie checking in, asking for coordinates, but she could barely form the words. Her eyes were locked on that spotted head in the water and the flash of gray ahead of it. She knew, as a biologist, what this river could do in minutes. Hypothermia in water this cold doesn't wait. Muscles seize, breath shortens. Even strong swimmers lose their rhythm. Now add a pregnancy on top, extra weight, organs shifted, lungs working harder. By any reasonable calculation, this was a terrible idea for a bobcat. And yet the most unreasonable thing in the canyon that morning was the one thing that refused to sink. There's a detail that stuck with Laurel later. Every time the current shoved the bucket toward mid-channel, the bobcat didn't just follow. She corrected. It wasn't a straight line. It was this constant, small choosing. Left again, right again, chin up, pause down, over and over, like a heartbeat that refused to skip a beat. If you've ever had a season where it felt like you were doing nothing but correcting, paying one more bill, making one more appointment, checking on one more person, you might recognize something in that pattern. It's not dramatic. It's not the stuff of headlines, but it's the everyday way mothers of all kinds keep someone else's world from going under. Halfway through that 2-mile stretch, the river narrowed between two boulders. The bucket dipped, vanished in a fold of white. The bobcat lunged after it and didn't come back up. Laurel stopped running. The only sound was water. She started counting. 1, 2, 3. Her chest burned. She knew how long a cat could stay under before panic took over. 4, 5, 6. In those seconds, she thought about the last time she'd stood this helpless near a dying animal, about the cat bed by her heater vent, about all the times she'd told herself not to get too attached because it hurt too much when things went wrong. 7, 8. Then downstream, the river broke open around a small, struggling shape. A wet head, pointed ears, jaws clamped tight on a gray plastic handle. The bobcat had the bucket. Sometimes the lesson is that courage doesn't look like shouting or charging. Sometimes it looks like not letting go, even when the river takes you under for longer than feels fair. In the next part, we're going to follow them onto a gravel bar, a wild mother, a battered bucket, and 6 tiny lives sealed inside. That's where this rescue swim turns into something even stranger and more beautiful than anyone on that riverbank expected. If you need stories that move at this pace, steady, real, a little bit healing, you're welcome to stay with this channel. Maybe tap subscribe so you can find us again. For now, let's walk downstream with Laurel and see what waits inside that gray plastic tomb. By the time Laurel caught up, the river had gone quiet. The drama had moved to shore. On a narrow gravel bar tucked under leaning cottonwoods, the pregnant bobcat stood over the gray plastic bucket like it was a wounded animal. Her fur hung heavy with river water, sides pumping, whiskers trembling. The bucket lay on its side, wedged against a snag of driftwood, lid still sealed tight with strips of silver tape. From where Laurel stopped, just inside the tree line, she could hear it now. Not the river, not the wind. Tiny sounds, thin, desperate mews muffled by plastic. It's one thing to imagine what's inside a container like that. She took a breath, lowered herself into a slow crouch, and kept her shoulders turned slightly sideways. No direct stare, no quick movements. She spoke just loud enough for the bobcat to hear over the lingering hiss of the Rio Chama. "Hey, Mama," she murmured. "You did the hard part. Let me do mine." The bobcat's ears flicked toward her. For a heartbeat, Laurel saw every reason in the world for that animal to bolt. human scent, strange voice, adrenaline crash after a brutal swim. Instead, the wild mother did something else. She stepped between Laurel and the bucket. Not a leap, not an attack, just a clear line in the gravel. These are mine to protect. Laurel stopped where she was, hands the bobcat's ribs, just a little too sharp under wet fur. The strain around her eyes, the weight of unborn kittens pressed down from inside, or the river chill seeped up through her paws from outside. This was a body past empty, running on something deeper than muscle or fat. The mewing from the bucket weakened. Laurel swallowed. "Okay," she said softly. "New plan. We do this together." She eased one step to the side, not toward the bobcat, but around, circling until she was almost level with the bucket. The wildcat's gaze tracked her, muscles taut, but she didn't move to block her again. It felt less like permission and more like a test. Laurel knelt by the gray plastic. The tape was wrapped in layer after layer, pressed down hard, edges crimped, like whoever had done it wanted to make sure nothing got out and nothing got in. Her fingers shook once, then steadied. She dug her nails under a corner and pulled. The first strip came away with a sticky rip that sounded too loud in the quiet. The smell hit next. Wet fur, stale milk, the metallic edge of fear. She tore back the last of the tape, pried the lid loose, and gently tipped the bucket. 6 kittens slid into the light. 5 of them moved, tiny paws scrabbling weakly, eyes barely open, each breath a small argument against what had been done to them. One, an orange tabby no bigger than Laurel's palm, lay still, fur plastered flat. Behind her, the bobcat leaned in, nose working fast. She touched each small body with the tip of her muzzle, pausing longest at the one that didn't respond. A sound came out of her, something between a chirp and a low, aching moan. Laurel had never heard a bobcat make that noise before. This is where another story might rage about the person who sealed that lid. There's a time for that. There are laws for that. Laurel knew those wheels would start turning the moment she called it in. But standing on that gravel bar, what mattered most wasn't the cruelty that put the kittens in the bucket. It was the choice standing over them now. The wild mother who had pulled them out of the river and the human kneeling beside her. Laurel scooped up the 5 breathing kittens, laying them gently on a dry patch of her jacket. The 6th, she cradled for a moment, thumb resting on that tiny, quiet chest, before setting the little body apart on the gravel. She didn't say anything. Some losses refuse words. The bobcat did what mothers do. She curled herself around the living, pulling them against the damp warmth of her belly, cleaning them with rough, determined strokes. Domestic kittens, wild bobcat, and river stones under all of them. None of it made sense, and all of it did. Maybe the small lesson here is this. For every hand that throws something away, there is sometimes another hand, or another set of paws, trying just as hard to pull it back from the edge. Laurel reached for her radio without standing up.
"Frankie, it's Laurel. I've got 6 kittens, 1 deceased, and a pregnant bobcat who thinks the rest are hers. I'm going to need help. And grace."
Fast as she can get here. What comes next is the part no one expected. A riverside camp, a night of labor, and a choice that would change the future for 9 young lives. If you're still with us, and these quieter moments of courage mean something to you, you're welcome to stay close. Maybe hit subscribe so you can find your way back when you need a gentle story. For now, we'll move into the evening on that gravel bar, where a tired bobcat is about to become a mother twice over. By the time the sun slid behind the canyon walls, the riverbank looked more like a tiny field hospital than a wild place. What began as a desperate rescue was quietly turning into something else. Rangers had strung portable panels around the gravel bar, just enough to give the pregnant bobcat space and a sense of boundary. A tarp stretched between cottonwoods to break the evening wind. One orange extension cord snaked down from the road above, feeding a single heat lamp that cast a soft circle of light over fur and stone and tired hands. Inside that circle, the wild mother lay on a folded blanket, 5 rescued kittens pressed against her belly. Her own unborn kittens shifted under her ribs. The Rio Chama whispered past in the dark, its voice softer now, as if it were finally willing to let someone else do the work. Laurel sat just outside the panel, cross-legged in the dust. She'd been there for hours. She'd watched Dr. Grace arrive with her truck bed full of supplies, warmed fluids, tiny syringes, a stethoscope light enough not to spook a bobcat. She'd watched Frankie haul down an extra generator, grumbling at the weight, then arrange it behind a stand of willows so the noise wouldn't frighten anyone. Grace had made a decision the moment she saw the scene. They would treat the kittens right where they were. Moving them away from the wild mother who'd just swum 2 miles to claim them felt wrong. So instead of metal exam tables and bright clinic lights, she knelt on river gravel, hands working in the glow of one bulb. One by one, she'd lifted the domestic kittens for a quick check. Temperature, breathing, and reflexes. A grey tabby whose heart beat a little stronger than the rest. A shaky calico who needed more help. The bobcat watched every movement, golden eyes following each kitten and then flicking back to Grace's face. "Stronger than she looks," Grace murmured at one point, nodding toward the wild mother. Most animals would be flat out after that kind of swim. She's still guarding. Laurel had smiled at that. A tired, crooked smile you might recognize if you've ever sat up all night with someone you love. She knew what it was to keep watch when your own body wanted to quit. As the sky deepened from blue to ink, the air cooled. Breath puffed white in the lamplight. Someone passed Laurel a thermos of coffee and a spare jacket. She accepted both without taking her eyes off the enclosure. Around 10 o'clock, something shifted. The bobcat, this pregnant bobcat who had already done more than anyone could ask, changed the way she breathed. The steady rise and fall became slower, deeper, then shortened again. Her belly tightened in visible waves. She pulled herself a little away from the mound of domestic kittens and looked back at her own flanks, uneasy. Grace slid closer, voice low and steady. "Contractions," she said. "She's starting labor." The words hung in the cool air. The rescue hadn't even finished unfolding, and already the next chapter had begun. Laurel watched as Grace explained what might happen. In the wild, a bobcat would seek out a hollow log or rock ledge, somewhere hidden. She would be alone. Here, this wild mother was giving birth under a tarp, within sight and scent of humans, with 5 unrelated kittens tucked under her chin. "I've spent 20 years answering emergency calls like this," Grace admitted quietly, eyes on the bobcat. "Some nights it feels like all I do is clean up after human messes. Tonight, it kind of feels like nature's trying to fix something in us, too." That thought settled on Laurel in a way she'd been too tired to name. Maybe that's one of the... And we find out we're the ones being held together by what we're seeing. The hours that followed moved in a slow, aching rhythm, indignant sound that made everyone exhale at once. Grace cleared the nose and mouth, then slid the newborn back to its mother. Haven. Laurel had started thinking of her as that now, though the name hadn't been said out loud yet, licked her new baby with the same determined care she'd shown the house kittens. Between contractions, she would stretch her neck to touch each tiny rescued kitten, as if counting all the lives she'd signed up for. Laurel wrapped her fingers around the fence rail and stayed there, knuckles white, as a second kitten, then a third, then a fourth came into the world. Each one felt like an answer to a question she hadn't admitted she'd been asking. Is it still worth caring this much when you've already lost so much? Somewhere in there, Frankie cleared his throat and said, almost embarrassed, "Haven't said a real prayer in years." Said one tonight. Didn't even know who I was talking to. Just seemed like the thing to do. No one answered him. They didn't have to. The river, the wind, the soft, tiny cries under the tarp. They were answering in their own way. If there's a lesson tucked into this night watch, it might be that healing doesn't always happen in clinics or churches or support groups. Sometimes it happens on a makeshift blanket beside a river, while a wild bobcat brings 4 new lives into a world that hasn't always been kind. In the next part of this story, we'll step into the days that follow, how this unlikely family learns to breathe, eat, and grow together on that gravel bar, and how justice starts quietly moving in the background for the kittens who were thrown away. If this slower pace, this kind of gentle, real courage, feels like something your heart needs more of, you're welcome to stay close. Maybe subscribe so you can find your way back on the nights when you can't sleep. For now, we'll let the river keep flowing, and we'll meet this new family in the light of morning. By the end of the first week, it was clear this wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a family that shouldn't exist, and a question no one quite knew how to answer. In the little enclosure by the Rio Chama, the days settled into a gentle rhythm. The 4 bobcat kittens grew fast, legs too big for their bodies, ears already tilting toward every sound. The 5 domestic kittens, those same tiny souls who had been sealed in a bucket, followed their wild siblings like younger cousins who'd been invited into a game they didn't fully understand. There was the gray tabby who always found the warmest spot first, the shy black and white who preferred to sleep with one paw touching Haven's flank, the calico, once so weak that Grace had wondered if she would make it through the night, now insisted on tumbling after bobcat tails twice her size. From the outside, it looked like chaos. From the inside, it worked. While that little mixed family learned how to eat and sleep and stretch in the morning light, another story was unfolding just above the canyon. A few miles away, up on a dusty ranch road, an older neighbor named Daniel stood on his porch, looking at the river in the distance and replaying yesterday in his head. He remembered seeing a truck he didn't recognize parked near the pullout. He remembered a gray bucket in the back. He remembered thinking, "That's odd," and then going back inside to fix his coffee. When he heard what Laurel and the others had pulled from the river, his stomach dropped. So Daniel did something simple and brave in its own way. He called the sheriff, drove into town with the memory card from his barn camera, and told them everything he'd seen, embarrassment and all. "I should have walked down there," he said. "I didn't, so I'm here now." Between his footage, the prints on the duct tape, and a few too casual words overheard in a bar, it didn't take long for deputies to knock on the right door. "We don't need to spend time with that man here. The law had its work to do, and it did it. Charges were filed, court dates set. The wheels of justice, slow but real, began to turn. Laurel felt a hot, sharp anger when she read the first report. Not just at what had been done, but at how easy it had been to treat 6 living beings as trash. She carried that anger with her when she climbed down to the gravel bar that evening. But standing there, watching Haven stretch herself around 9 sleeping bodies, Laurel realized something important. If she stayed in that place of rage, she'd miss the bigger miracle happening right in front of her. So instead of rehearsing what she'd like to say to the man in handcuffs, she walked to a small ring of river stones beneath the cottonwoods. That's where they'd laid the little orange kitten the first day. Someone had tucked a wildflower between the rocks. Laurel knelt, brushed gravel off the smoothest stone, and spoke just above a whisper. "You mattered," she said. "You started all this." It didn't change what had happened. It didn't erase the hurt. But it shifted the weight a little, from revenge toward responsibility, from what he did toward what we do next. And what came next was just as heavy in its own way. In staff meetings under that top, people argued, quietly but earnestly. Haven was still a wild bobcat. Her own kittens would, under normal circumstances, be candidates for release once they were old enough and wary enough. The house kittens, by contrast, weren't built for Camion winters and long, hungry nights. They were domestic, even if their first weeks had been anything but. Was it fair to keep a wild mother in human care because of what had been done to someone else's kittens? Was it fair to pull those kittens away from the only mother they remembered, just because the arrangement didn't fit neatly in a handbook? Grace laid it out one evening in simple words. "In a perfect world," she said, "none of them would be here. They'd all be where they were meant to be. But this isn't that world. It's this one. And in this world, we are responsible for the harm our species has done, and for the care we can still offer." Laurel looked over at Haven, who was teaching one of her bobcat daughters how to paw at a dry leaf without startling the calico curled beside it. It was hard to argue with what her eyes could see. A family had formed, whether anyone had planned it or not. Maybe the small lesson in this part of the story is that doing right is rarely tidy. It's carrying more than one truth at once. That justice matters, that wildness matters, that love can grow in the strangest arrangements, and trying to honor all of them the best you can. In the next part, we'll step away from the riverbank and up onto higher ground to the High Mesa Wildlife Center, which decided to build a new kind of home around this impossible family. We'll see what it looks like when a story like this grows into paths, windows, and a sanctuary you could actually visit. If walking through these questions gently helps you, if you need reminders that people still wrestle with what's right instead of what's easy, you're welcome to stay close. Maybe subscribe so you can find your way back on the days you need hope. For now, let's follow this family as their world widens beyond the river. By the time summer settled over northern New Mexico, the river story had grown walls, windows, and walking paths. What began on a gravel bar by the Rio Chama now had an address: High Mesa Wildlife Center. If you were to visit on a clear morning, you'd park under tall pines and follow a simple sign: Bobcat Habitat, River Family. The path would lead you up a gentle rise, past sagebrush and rabbit brush, toward a stretch of land that looks, at first glance, like any other hillside in the high desert. Rocks, scrub, a ribbon of water glinting in the sun. Only when you stepped onto the wooden boardwalk and looked through the one-way glass would you see what made this place different. Down below, in 2 acres of carefully built terrain, a spotted bobcat moved with easy confidence along a rock ledge. Her name, written quietly on a plaque you might not notice at first, is Haven. She doesn't know that, of course. What she knows is that this is her ground now. 4 nearly grown bobcat kittens ghost behind her, lighter on their feet, but already carrying the same deliberate grace. And threading among them, like mismatched beads on the same string, are 5 domestic cats, sleek, healthy, tails high. Every few minutes, the whole mixed group knots and unknots around the little stream that runs through the habitat. The water is fed by a real spring, not the Rio Chama, but it sounds similar. A steady, forgiving hush. The gray tabby from the bucket days walks in step with the boldest bobcat sister, copying where she places her paws. The tiny calico, once weak enough that her chances seemed slim, sprawls on a flat rock in a patch of sun, exactly where older visitors like to watch from the glass. They come on Thursdays, some with canes, some with grandkids, some alone. One retired school teacher always looks for the calico first. From the center's side, this place is more than a viewing area. It's a classroom. Laurel stands with small groups along the glass, her voice low and even. She points out how Haven still keeps to the shadows when staff come in to clean, how she scent marks, how her bobcat sons practice quiet, patient stalking in the tall grass, even though their prey is a scattering of feather toys and scent trails instead of mice. She explains gently that bobcats are shy neighbors in much of the United States, rarely seen but always working, keeping rodent numbers down, balancing an ecosystem most of us only think about when something goes wrong. She also explains why Haven can't simply be turned loose now. Too many close human contacts, too much cross-species bonding, too much risk that comfort around people could get her killed outside the fence. It's a hard truth, and she doesn't sugarcoat it. But then she gestures to the rocky slope where the 9 young cats wrestle and nap and explore. And she lets that picture stand beside the hard truth. "This isn't perfect," she'll say, "but it's safe. And after what they've all been through, safe is a kind of mercy too." For many visitors, especially those in their 50s, 60s, 70s, there's a quiet recognition in that. Life doesn't always end up where we thought it would. Sometimes we don't go back to the wild places we dreamed of. Sometimes a smaller, well-tended space is what keeps us going. Maybe that's the small lesson woven into the paths at High Mesa. A sanctuary is not a failure of freedom. It's a promise that even after the worst someone else can do, there will be food, water, medical care, and a watchful eye making sure you're not alone. News of Haven's story has brought more than tourists. It's brought donations. $10 from a woman in Ohio who wrote, for the little ones in the bucket. A check from a rancher down the road who admitted he'd never thought much about bobcats until now. It's brought school groups who stand wide-eyed as Laurel talks about compassion crossing species lines. And on some evenings, when the visitors have gone and the light has gone soft and gold, Laurel walks the boardwalk by herself. She pauses at the glass. Haven happens to look up. Their eyes meet for a moment, just long enough to remember cold water, a grey bucket, and a choice that changed more lives than anyone will ever be able to count. In our last part of this story, we're going to sit with that feeling a little longer. We'll watch this family in the quiet hours and talk about what stays with us when the video ends and the house goes still again. If this place, this slower, kinder corner of the internet, feels like somewhere you might want to return to on hard nights, you're welcome to subscribe so you can find your way back. For now, let's move into the soft light of evening at High Mesa and see what hope looks like when the cameras stop rolling. Most stories end when the danger is past. This one keeps going in the quiet after. Picture High Mesa Wildlife Center on a winter evening. The parking lot is empty. The last school bus left hours ago. The wind has settled down to a soft hum in the pines, and the little stream in the bobcat habitat whispers over its stones like a smaller, gentler. Around her, in a loose circle, 9 shapes rest in the fading light. 4 spotted bobcat bodies and 5 sleek house cats, all curled in their own favorite places, all still orbiting the same wild mother who swam 2 miles for someone else's kittens. On the boardwalk, Laurel stands alone with a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. It's a holiday, technically. She could be home. Instead, she chose this. She's watching the way the gray tabby still insists on pressing her side against one of the bobcat daughters. How the tiny calico has claimed the warmest rock near the glass, as if she knows someone might be looking for her. Laurel doesn't say anything out loud. She just lets her shoulders drop and feels a little of the year's weight slip off. This is what stays for her after the river. A place she can come when the world feels too sharp, where she can remember that mercy didn't stop once the bucket was opened. It kept unfolding, one small day at a time. She's not the only one. Once a week, when the roads are clear, Daniel, the neighbor who came forward with his barn camera footage, drives up with his grandkids. He never talks much about the man who threw the kittens away. Court dates came and went, sentencing happened, laws were strengthened. Those things mattered. And then they moved into the past, where such things go. What lives in him now is something else. He leans on the railing, points quietly to the cats below and tells the kids, "That's what happens when you pay attention the second time you're asked, not the first." It's his way of saying he forgave himself enough to turn his regret into action. Down in town, the retired schoolteacher who sends $5 checks in shaky handwriting doesn't travel much anymore. But she knows, in her bones, that there's a bobcat on a High Mesa whose story she's somehow part of. When she has a hard day, she looks at the little photo of Haven and the kittens she keeps tucked in her Bible and remembers that gentle things can still win. Maybe that's what a story like this leaves behind when the video ends and your house goes quiet again. Not a big, flashy, happily ever after, but a series of small, steady invitations. To believe that the current you're fighting has a purpose. To trust that the effort you're making for someone else, child, parent, partner, old dog, stray cat, matters, even when no one is filming. To accept that sometimes safe doesn't look like the freedom you pictured in your 20s. Sometimes it looks like a sanctuary built out of the worst thing that happened, where you can finally rest. If you're watching this in your own quiet room, maybe with a cup of tea or the TV glow for company, I'd like to gently ask you something. Where are you in this story right now? Are you in the cold river, doing your best for someone who can't repay you? Are you on the gravel bar, trying to choose compassion over anger? Are you at the glass, needing a place where you can see proof that kindness still exists? Wherever you find yourself, I hope Haven Swim, those rescued kittens, and the life they built together leave you with a little more room to breathe, a little more faith that not everything is broken, and that some things, even a wild bobcat's heart, bend toward care. If this touched something in you, Take a moment after this video ends. Sit with it. Notice what part of your own life it brings up. That quiet reflection will do more for you than any speech I could give.
And if you'd like more stories like this, slow, real, and a little healing, you're warmly invited to like this video and subscribe so you can find your way back here on the nights you need it. If you feel called to go one step further, you can also use the Super Thanks button or donate through the links below.
Every bit helps the people on the ground who step in for wild animals like bobcats when the river's been too rough,
and helps little lives, domestic and wild, get another chance.
Thank you for staying with this story. May there always be a bit of Haven's courage in your own swim.